Appreciate that reading this morning in the songs that Darren led us in. They were extremely appropriate, as I think we'll see in just a minute. And thank you also for the prayer, Brother David. You can get tickets to a preseason football game, and it's your favorite team, and you're ready to go, and you're excited, and you show up, and you find out that they're playing all the second stringers. It's a little bit of a letdown. I know we had second stringers in the class out here this morning. We had a second stringer back here in class this morning, and now the preacher's a second stringer. It's a little bit like a preseason football game this morning. So I appreciate your attendance, and pray that we can all get something out of this. You know, even though it's all second stringers, we're worshiping a very holy God this morning, and so I pray that we can do that appropriately. That's my first sports analogy. It won't be my last one. So I'm always grateful for the challenge of being able to present some thoughts, and I'm grateful for that opportunity this morning. I'm going to start with a narrative, and this is for sure dramatized, and I'm going to add a few things that we can't find specifically in Scripture, but I'm going to try to put us in the place. I'm going to try to put you this morning in the place of this historical Bible character. And you'll figure out who it is, or many of you will by the time we're through this. But again, my goal here is I want to try to. This whole lesson is about trying to put us in the place of this character. This character that is important enough that he's mentioned in all the Gospels. There's not very many of those, by the way. I mean, a relatively short list of people who are mentioned in all four Gospels, but our character this morning is one of them. So, come back with me mentally to first century Palestine. And I'm going to put you in a prison cell in this dark, dank, moldy first century prison cell. And it's not just general population. This is death row. And the Romans didn't exactly work on strict timetables. You didn't know exactly when your time was coming, but you knew it was coming. You're on death row. Your feet are shackled. There's very little light. You're chained to the prisoner next to you, and life is pretty miserable. Obviously, there's no comforts there. I mean, you're sleeping on the rock, or you might be leaned against a rock, and how do you do that when you're chained to the guy next to you? And obviously there's no bathrooms, and the whole place is just putrid and gross and smells and disease, and it's a miserable place. But that miserable place is where we find ourselves. And beyond all of the physical stuff, the discomfort and the disease and the disgust, there's just this pit, this dread, this pit in your stomach, this dread every hour, because you know that your time is coming. You know, like you're on death row for a reason. You know your time is coming, and because of your crimes in the Roman system that we're in, you know what's coming. Like crucifixion is intended and intentional to be as visual, as intimidating, as brutal as possible for public display. And you don't spend an hour of your life that you're not thinking about that all the time. And you find yourself looking at your hands and wondering what it's going to be like when there's a stake that's put through it. And it's like it's just a depressing, gnawing dread. Just every hour. You're very familiar with crucifixion. You've definitely seen it before. The Romans, again, it was public. It was intended to be public. The Romans didn't hide it. Everybody that you know has heard the story of Spartacus, who about 70 or 80 years ago started an uprising or revolt. And the Romans didn't mind to crucify somebody literally every 50 yards for about 6 miles that were in that revolt. And the stories of how they hung there and died, they're pretty common. Like this is not, you know what's going to happen to you. Like how long are you going to hang there before you finally die? You think about how long that you might be able to press yourself up and get your breath. Like how long is it going to last for me? That kind that kind of thought. But the other thing that you know is that tomorrow's a holiday, and that the day after that's the Sabbath. And so, maybe if we can make it through today, nothing's going to happen the next 2 days. I should get 3 more days. And as disgusting and nasty and terrible and uncomfortable and miserable you are, that little glimmer of maybe 3 more days, right? Like maybe I can just exist here. If I could just, maybe something incredible will happen, whatever. But maybe I can squeeze out 3 more days out of this miserable existence. There's always a commotion outside, kind of in the common area, and there's always rabble and hollering. But today it seems like the crowd's a little bigger, and there's definitely something going on. There's a commotion. You can't make out words, but you can make out noises. You can make out conversation. You can make out that there's something going on. The crowd's a little bigger than usual, and suddenly there's this chant that you hear, and you can't make it out at first, but you can definitely tell that somebody's chanting something. Like you can hear, you can't just make out the word, but you're sitting there and it's miserable and you're dreading and you're depressed, but you can hear this chant, and you can't. Then it comes a little louder and a little clearer, and you can definitely hear that there's an uprising of people that are chanting something, but you can't make it out. And you're looking at the guys next to you, and you say, "What is that? What are they?" And then it just becomes a little bit clearer, a little bit clearer. It is sterao. Steraoton. Sterao. Steraoton. Sterao. Steraoton. Crucify him. Sterao. Steraoton. Here it kind of reverberate through the sterao. Steraoton. Crucify him. And the pit in your stomach just turns into you're just thoroughly overwhelmed. Because any hope that you had of making it the next 3 days, like something has happened, there's been some kind of uprising, today's your day. Like the people are bloodthirsty, it is going to be today. Sterao. You hear that reverberate, and as you still hear that, you hear the crunch of kind of dirt and rock underneath the boots or the sandals of the Roman soldiers that are coming to get you, and you've heard that sound before, and you can't even look up, and they unlock the cell where you are, and they come unchain you from the prisoner next to you, and your knees don't even work, right? I mean, you're just like, this is it, the thing I've been dreading, like this is happening. And they walk you outside. It's the first time you've seen direct sunlight, and you're squinting in the sunlight, and you walk out, and you see this crowd, and they cheer. The crowd's a little bigger than you expected. It's like, what are they cheering for? Like, I don't even know that I was that well known. So you're led outside, and you're led kind of in the middle of the crowd, kind of roughly drugged by the soldiers, just like you always are. And then just in this really weird moment, they unlock your shackles on your feet, and they unlock the chain that's around your neck, and you hear probably the only, this Roman soldier doesn't know very many Aramaic words, but he says to you, "Go." Like, this is beyond unusual, right? Like, this is like incredible. Like, it's too good really to be true, and so you don't leave it first. You kind of stand and look around. But when the shackles drop, the crowd cheers. And that you don't understand. And so you stand there and you look around, and the Roman soldier shoves you in the back, says, "Go," again. And is this like a trick? Am I going to take 2 steps and they're going to tackle me? And it's looking over your shoulder, and so you kind of slowly walk away, and they're letting you go. I mean, they're letting you go. And so as you walk out, and you're still completely unsure about what's going on here, but the attention of the crowd is turned, and it's turned to this other guy, and they're attaching his hands to the whipping post, and so his hands are being stretched out like this, and it's clear that he is the one that the crowd was cheering for, and he is currently being beaten with the scourge, and you see the pain that he's going through, and you see the whip marks that are on his back. And you're stopped cold for a minute, and it suddenly hits you. You get this realization, like, that's my beating. That's my beating. Like, that guy's taking my beating. That guy's going to be on my cross. that guy's taking my place. I don't think we think enough about what it is to be Barabbas. I'm going to talk this morning about being Barabbas. Look, I'll give you the punchline at the beginning. We're all that guy. That guy took our place. We're all Barabbas. That is wild. That is crazy. That guy took our place. The story of Barabbas is recorded. This character of Barabbas is recorded in all four Gospels. So we're going to take a few minutes this morning just to read those Gospel accounts to make sure that we fully understand what we know about this character and then make a few points about what it is to be Barabbas. To remind you of the timeline, this is after the trials of Jesus, as they were. You know, Jesus was taken before first the Jewish authorities. He was taken to the high priests of that time. And there was this sham mockery of a trial, and he was convicted. But the Jews didn't have the authority in their governmental system to put somebody to death. And so they required the Romans to sign off if they were really going to kill this Jesus. And so after the Jewish trials, he was sent before the Roman governor. It was Pilate, the procurator, the governor. He was sent before Pilate. And Pilate couldn't find any issues with him, so Pilate sent him to Herod and just kind of a jurisdictional, battle there. And Herod couldn't find anything wrong with him and sent him back to Pilate. And so convicted by the Jews but found innocent by the Romans, and that's where we are as we enter this conversation about who this guy Barabbas was. And he's mentioned in all four Gospels, but we're not going to take them sequentially, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're going to look at them in a different order. And we're going to start in John. So John chapter 18, and this is the shortest of the accounts, but we're going to compile all these accounts about Barabbas, and inevitably, I'm going to call him Barnabas, like 1 up to 5 times this morning. Overlook that. I've managed to do that every time I've tried to practice this, so it's going to be Barabbas as often as possible. So we're going to read about Barabbas in John chapter 18, and we'll start in verse 38, kind of in the middle of that verse. We read this, and after Pilate had said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them. So again, guilty by the Jews, innocent by the Romans. And Pilate says, I find no guilt in him, but you have a custom that I should release one man to you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? And they cried out, not this man, but Barabbas. And Barabbas was a robber. So there's a few things we learn about just in this first passage in John chapter 18, and we'll kind of add to our narrative as we look at the different pieces of information that all the gospel writers give us. But we learn in John chapter 18 that Pilate has found no guilt in Jesus. That as far as Roman law is concerned, that he's innocent. We can't find any guilt in this Jesus. That's obviously a critically important point. Whatever the Jews had problems with him, Rome could find no reason for him to even be arrested, much less convicted, much less executed. However, there was a custom, and we learn here in John chapter 18, there was a custom at the Passover that one person should be released. This is not entirely uncommon to us. At the end of a governor's term today, there is these blanket pardons that are handed out to either for the law of justice or for the return for some good lobbying. However you want to look at that practice, at the end of presidential and governor terms, there are these pardons. Like this person, doesn't matter the conviction, that is just wiped away. You're set free. So it's not too dissimilar from that idea. It's interesting that we can't find in history that this custom existed before Pilate or after Pilate. This may have just been Pilate's thing, that this is something Pilate did. And that kind of makes sense because if you studied anything about this Roman governor Pilate, he was not a great guy. Like he very clearly had the mission of keeping the Jews in some kind of order, in some kind of keep down revolts. But he himself was not a good guy. He stole from the Jewish treasury. He slaughtered Jews. But then he would try to do these gestures to try to just keep enough goodwill with the people that they would allow him to stay in place. And so it would make sense that Pilate kind of instituted this gesture. We don't know how many times it had happened, but it came to his mind that this might be a good way to get out of this Jesus problem. Because he couldn't find any reason to be convicted, but the Jews have already convicted him. What about if we just institute this little custom? Jesus can go free. You can still have the fact that you convicted him, but Rome can get out of the issue. So he has that idea. But the crowd says, not this man, not Jesus, but Barabbas. And we learn here that Barabbas is a robber. One interesting other note about Barabbas is his name, just his name, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but the name Barabbas is made out of two Hebrew parts, Barabbas, and we're probably familiar with both of them in Scripture. You know, Bar is the Hebrew, means son of. Remember when Jesus says, blessed are you, Simon Bar Jonah, Simon son of Jonah? That Bar means son of, and Abba, we're familiar with that. When Jesus says Abba, Father, like it is a close term of endearment that means like dad. And so Barabbas literally just means son of the father, son of the dad. It's the dad's son. Pretty interesting. Another reason that Barabbas is all of us. He's just son of the father. Barabbas is the son of the father. But this Barabbas is a robber. The next account we'll read is in Matthew chapter 27. Okay, same timeline, same account, just a different perspective. Matthew chapter 27, in verse 15. Read a few verses here with me in Matthew chapter 27. Starting in verse 15. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. So we learned something there already, that it appears that the crowd, the rabble, the Jews, however this happened, the Jews got to choose who this person was. And they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus who's called Christ? For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. And besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream. Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to destroy Jesus. And the governor asked again, which of the two do you want me to release for you? And they said, Barabbas. And Pilate said to them, then what shall I do with Jesus, called the Christ? And they said, let him be crucified. And he said, why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, let him be crucified. A few other pieces of information we learn here. Barabbas was well known. This wasn't a character that the Jewish people wouldn't have been familiar with. Apparently the story of Barabbas and how he ended up in the position that he's in was well known. He's not a good guy. Any thought that we have like Barabbas was falsely accused and that's how this all got put together, we should set that aside. Barabbas was a pretty scuzzy guy, to say the least. He's notorious. The people knew who he was. Depending on the version that you have, there's this real interesting comment in verse 17 that it may have been that Barabbas' first name was actually Jesus, and you see that in some translations. It says, who do you want to release for you, again, depending on your translation, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus called the Christ? Like, maybe you guys are just confused about which Jesus you want. Like, which Jesus do you want? Do you want Jesus Barabbas or Jesus that you call the Christ? Which Jesus do you want is probably a pretty good question to think about, too. And it's also interesting that it wasn't that Barabbas was offered because he deserved to go. Pilate put forth Barabbas because he was so scuzzy, because he was so unpleasant, because he was so distasteful, because he was a terrible person. Hey, would you like this guy who's probably going to go out in society and kill and pillage and give you a bad name, or do you want this Jesus? And remember, we're going to learn in a minute, I'm skipping ahead, we're going to learn in a minute that Barabbas was an insurrectionist, a rebel, a seditionist, a terrorist. How would it look to Rome that the people chose to release a terrorist instead of this guy who taught something they didn't like? So he gave them this kind of this kind of, in his mind, this obvious choice. Like Barabbas was chosen because he was hopeless, like because nobody wanted him in polite society. Hey, do you really want this guy out amongst you, or do you want Jesus? Obviously, we know who the crowd chose, because Pilate's primary objective was to just get out of the Jesus problem. And we do learn here for the first time that it was Barabbas who was released. So skip down with me to verse 24. When Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning. That's the only thing here that he's trying to avoid. Whoever dies, whatever happens, a riot is a no-no. That means he loses his position. So Pilate makes a business decision. This is not a moral decision. This is not a justice decision. Pilate makes a business decision. What are we going to do here with Jesus? He took water and washed his hands and said, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves. And the people answered, his blood be on us and on our children. Okay, strong response. And he released for them Barabbas. He released Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him up to be crucified. So we learn that Barabbas was actually released. Mark chapter 15. And I know these are somewhat lengthy narratives, but I think it's important, if you haven't studied Barabbas recently, to kind of get the full picture of what all the Gospels say about this character. Mark chapter 15, starting in verse 6. Now at the feast he used to release for them one prisoner for whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered and said, do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews? For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. And Pilate said to them, then what shall I do with the man you call the king of the Jews? And they cried out, crucify him. And Pilate said, what evil has he done? And they shouted all the more, crucify him. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him up to be crucified. This guy is among the rebels in prison. The implication is that he is kind of the ringleader of this rebellion, of this insurrection, of this attempt in whatever small way to try to overthrow part of the Roman rule. And whether that's taking over some small city or whether that is just trying to annoy and kill some Roman soldiers in Jerusalem, we're not sure. But there's a group of these rebels, terrorists, domestic terrorists, insurrectionists, and Barabbas seems to be the ringleader. And in whatever happened in this particular uprising that he was part of, it ended up that he killed someone, that he's a murderer. And so there is no doubt that for a foreign, and remember, to Rome, Jews are foreigners, to a foreign rebellious murderer, he's going to the cross. Like they need a public display that Jews, you don't need to be doing this. There's no doubt about where he's going. But Pilate thinks that he can play one part of the Jews against the other part. Like he thinks that, you've sent Jesus to me just because you're envious that the people have kind of supported him. And so he says to the people, he says, are you sure you don't want this Jesus? The high priests don't like him, but that's a small segment of the population. Surely the people would prefer that this teacher would go free instead of this murderer just being loose among your midst. But we're told that whatever pull, whatever authority, whatever influence the chief priests had, they were able to stir up the people and turn the mob of the people against Jesus. Okay, last account in Luke chapter 23. And then we'll make a few points. Luke chapter 23. Luke is the historian. But he has you can almost tell here that he has a motive. He's got a point in mind when he writes beginning in verse 13. Pilate then called together the chief priests and rulers of the people. So he gets that small group together first. And he said to them, you brought me this man as one who is misleading the people. And after examining him before you, behold, I didn't find him guilty of any of the charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to me. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish and release him." But they all cried out together, "Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas, a man who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in the city and for murder." Pilate addressed them once more, desiring to release Jesus. But they kept shouting, "Crucify, crucify him." In Greek, storao, storaoton. A third time he said to them, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found no guilt deserving death. I will punish and release him." But they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. And Pilate decided that their demand should be granted, and he released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, for whom they asked, and he delivered Jesus over to their will. Luke seems to highlight the innocence of Jesus. You can see how many times that he, in this short passage, highlights the fact that no one found guilt. Verse 14, verse 15, verse 22, if you go back and look at all those points, Luke highlights again and again there was no guilt. And then it seems like that he just puts this divine spotlight in verse 25. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, but he delivered innocent Jesus over to their will. The rebel goes free, the innocent gets killed. That's the account of Barabbas. And so I'm pretty transparent about the point this morning. In the time we have left, we're just all Barabbas. And to the extent that we don't think we're Barabbas, we're missing it. Like, we're all Barabbas. We're all guilty. And we've all been sentenced. And it doesn't do us any good to sugarcoat that or to patronize about it or to downplay it. Like, it's just, we kind of need to accept that we're Barabbas. Isaiah 53, this one of these most powerful Old Testament passages, and thanks, Jonathan, for your reading of it. But notice with me a couple of things in Isaiah 53. In this prophecy about that Messiah. Look at just specifically in verse 6 at this time. "All we, like sheep, have gone astray. We have turned every one to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all." Each one of us, we could go to a lot of different passages to make this point. We could go to all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We could go to all the wages of sin is death. We could touch on all those passages that are pretty familiar to us. I like this one. Sticks with me. All of us, like sheep, have gone astray. We've all done what we want to do. We've all followed our own path. We've all left the idea that Jesus is Lord of our lives, and we've done our own thing. We've all, like sheep, just kind of wandered off into something stupid, doing our own thing. The charge against us is rebellion. Like, does that sound familiar? The charge against us is rebellion. There is an authority, and we have decided to rebel against it. We decided to go our own way, that the following of the authority is distasteful to us for whatever reason. We're going to make our own decision. We're going to follow our own way. All of us, like sheep, have turned to his own way. Like, this attitude, this outlook of following after what I want or what I think is best. I think Paul makes a very interesting point about this in Romans chapter 8. He says the outlook of the flesh is hostile to God. It doesn't submit to the will of God, and goes even further than that to say, nor is it able to do so. It's not just that if you're trying to make your own decisions based on what you think is best, that living your life to try to satisfy the direction that you think that you should go, it's not only that that's hostile to God, not only that it rebels God, but as long as you got that attitude, Paul says you can't follow. It's not just that you won't, but that you can't. That's pretty interesting comment. That's pretty interesting language. So we're Barabbas, in my mind, in large part because we don't think we're Barabbas. Like, we don't consider the going our own way that we do to be as bad as insurrection and murder. We don't view it that way. We don't see it that way. As I heard somebody say, like, none of us thinks that we need a complete destruction of the old man and a complete transformation. all of us, it's human nature, all of us think, I need a little polish, right? I need to clean up my act a little bit. I need polishing. And what Scripture says is you don't need polishing, you need destruction of the person. You need complete, total transformation into a new man. Like that mindset is completely different. Like until we realize we're Barabbas, until we realize that what we need is not, just to clean up our act a little bit, but that we're just flat guilty, we're kind of doomed. And to the extent that when we talk about Jesus and religious things with others, if we minimize or patronize that point, man, I'm worried about that. Like every time we say, look, I know that you haven't done anything that's that bad, but you still need Jesus, and we're pushing that person farther from God, in my judgment. Like we got to realize that thing that wasn't so bad was a sheep going its own way, was rebellion against heavenly authority, was Barabbas. So minimizing that is so self-defeating. And are we going to be able to say with no malice, with no smugness, with no condescension, are we going to be able to say to that person, man, I love you, and you're lost, and I am devastated about that? Because if we're not able to be that honest about the true state of Barabbas, I fear that we're minimizing who we really are and what condition we're really in. And sometimes, that going our own way, sometimes it's not just that we are Barabbas, we choose Barabbas, just like that crowd did. We don't choose God, we don't choose the things of God, we choose something to make our lives more convenient. That's the choice that they made with Barabbas. So, it's not only that we are Barabbas, but many times we choose Barabbas. We don't realize that we are Barabbas. And this is not about the note there. This is not about staying within the lines. And I hope that this comes across correctly with what I want to say here. But like the Spirit is not in us just so that we can look down and make sure that we don't do these things and we do these things. Like the Spirit is in us so that we can stay within the lines. Like the Spirit is in us so that we can look to God and follow God truly, and we'll stay within the lines as a consequence of a life that's given over to God. Like a life that is completely free from rebellion, a life that doesn't seek its own way like a sheep, a life that is fully devoted to God, it stays within those lines. That is a fruit of the Spirit. That is a consequence of a life that's given over to God. That is not that we have to look down and be terrified every moment of stepping outside the lines. It is about giving ourselves over to God so that the lines don't matter. We are in them because we are in Him. That's a pretty significant mindset difference, I think. Sin is not a lack of focus on the rules, but it's a lack of focus on God. That if once we rebel against that, once we quit following Him, inevitably we get outside of the lines. We sin and err because we lose our focus. We rebel against who the true leader is. We think it's all on us. Second sports analogy. I'm watching the football game last night. Not the Kentucky game. That was great. Let's talk about that later. I'm watching the end of an Alabama football game, and it comes down to a last-second field goal. Score's tied, 1 second left. For whatever reason, me and Jackson are watching it on his tiny phone. Like, why would we make that choice? We got big, nice TVs. We're watching it on his little, tiny phone. Anyway, so we're watching the last second of this football game, and they bring out this young kicker to kick this field goal that's going to beat the number 1 team in the country. And as that kicker walks on the field, like you can visibly see the weight of the state of Texas is resting on his shoulders. He understands that literally every athletic loving eye in the state is on him at this point, and it's his leg that's going to decide whether they win this game. It was just an enormity resting on this kid. You can see this in other sporting events at times, like the free throw at the end of the game or whatever sports you, like the enormity of the situation was just weighing on this kid. And he knuckleballed one through there. It was awful looking, but he made it. But we think we're that guy. We think that the enormity of this, we have to be able to do this, all that weight is on our shoulders, and how are we going to do this and stay within the lines? And we fail to realize that all that stuff is nailed to the cross. Like, if we are not rebellious, if we are truly following God, it's not on us. Like, we're going to stay in those lines. It's the weight of the world is not on us. It's not, every decision isn't like, I'm doing a poor job of communicating this. It is not as if our salvation rests on our decision to discern every direction, looking down 100% of the time. It rests on our ability to follow God. It rests on our ability to follow Him, and our lives will stay within the lines. Like this enormity that our salvation is dependent on our good choices. And yes, we have to follow Him, but I would argue to you that that is a result of a life that's given over to God. That we're not going to force our way to make good decisions with a mind that's hostile to God. That a mind that is following God makes good decisions as a consequence. So we're guilty. We're outside the lines, not because we don't focus on the lines, but because we're not focused on God. And like Barabbas, our place has been taken. Man, those songs, and Darren did a fantastic job. I had a hard time singing those songs, man, with all this in mind. Guilty, vile, and helpless, we. Spotless Lamb of God was He. Full atonement. Can that be? Hallelujah. There was one who was willing to die in my stead, that a soul so unworthy could live. In my place, condemned, He stood. The guilty is pardoned. The innocent takes the punishment. This is the story of Barabbas. This is exactly what happened to Barabbas. He was guilty. He was condemned. There was not a plausible legal argument that he could argue his way out of this. There's not a plausible legal argument we can argue our way out of this. We're guilty. That's what makes it grace. Like, it is undeserved. We are unworthy. And the guilty gets pardoned and the innocent gets let free. And it doesn't make logical sense to us why that is the case. First, in the book of 1 Peter, you can see the direct inferences to Isaiah 53. Like, he has definitely got Isaiah 53 in mind as he writes these verses. And so we're going to kind of read what I call Peter's interpretation of Isaiah 53, his restating of those words. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. And when he was maligned, he did not answer back. When he suffered, he threatened no retaliation, but he committed himself to God who judges justly. He himself bore our sins. He himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, that we may cease from sinning and live for righteousness. Our place has been taken. We're standing out. We got the availability is there that we could stand out there, like literally being led to the cross, and they unhook the chains. Doesn't make sense. It's not logical. It's grace. Our place has been taken. We are Barabbas. We're Barabbas if we allow ourselves to be freed. And isn't that a ridiculous thing to think about? Why wouldn't you want to be free? There's a lot of people that choose not to be free. Again, we got to be, without any hate or malice or condescension, we got to be honest. Like, man, you're lost, and that is devastating to me. But don't you want to be free? It's interesting what Jesus says in Luke chapter 4 when he returns to Nazareth in that passage, and he quotes from the book of Isaiah in Luke chapter 4. Let's start in verse 16 get the context. Jesus comes to Nazareth, where he'd been brought up, and as was his custom, he goes to the synagogue on the Sabbath, and he stands up to read, and the scroll of Isaiah is given to him, and he unrolls the scroll and finds the place where it's written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, and to proclaim liberty to the captives, recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll, and he gave it to the attendant, and he sat back down, and the eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he said to them, "Today the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." When Jesus came to set at liberty the captives, when he came to set free those who were in chains, what do we think that means? That Jesus was on this path on earth to make sure that all the prisons were emptied? Absolutely not. Barabbas is a physical manifestation of all of us spiritually, that Jesus came to set free the captives, that those chains, literal chains that Satan has us in of sin, are capable of being unlocked. And why wouldn't we make that choice? Why do we have to say, if we allow ourselves to be freed? Isn't that a ridiculous choice, to not allow yourself to be freed? Like, how do you get to that place where you'd rather be there? The invitation comes early. I got another slide after this, but here's the invitation. Like, God is asking you to be freed. There's not a logical reason to deny that choice this morning. It is illogical to want to remain in captivity when Jesus is offering freedom. That Barabbas would walk out into that sunlight and say, I think I'll go back in. I think I'll take what I deserve. Jesus is allowing you to get out of what you deserve. Man, please take advantage of that opportunity in just a minute. The other question we got to ask ourselves about Barabbas is, how do we respond to our pardon? How do we respond to grace? Because we don't know how Barabbas responded. Kind of one of the interesting things about Barabbas, this is the last we hear of him. He knew he was guilty. He knew that Jesus was taking his place. We don't have any idea how he responded. I tell you, there's two very different legends or stories about what happened to Barabbas. There's one legend that says that the reason that Barabbas is mentioned by name, and there's relatively few people that are mentioned by name, especially in all four Gospels, the reason Barabbas is mentioned by name is because he became a follower of Jesus, and his name was well known among Jesus' followers, and so his name was used. There's no evidence of that. Cool story. So maybe Barabbas became a follower. There's also a tradition, completely the other side of the road. There's a tradition that Barabbas was killed a few years later in another revolt against Rome. That having stepped out into that sunlight and having those shackles dropped off of him, he immediately went back to the life that he was living. And he went back to that group of insurrectionists and murderers that he had been with, and he went back to that life. I don't know which one of those is true. Pick your own adventure. Choose whichever ending you like. But I will tell you that whatever Barabbas did after his pardon is an indicator of what he thought about his pardon. What he thought about his release is exemplified in how he reacted to it. If he thought it was just a lucky break and he didn't put much thought into it, and he didn't really give any thought to who Jesus was, he probably went back to his old life. If he truly contemplated that guy took his place and assumed the gravity of that and learned something about Jesus, man, his life changed forever. I promise you. But the way he lived his life indicated what he thought about it. The way we live our lives indicate what we think about our forgiveness. Just like Barabbas. Which way do you want to go? So, as a Christian, if you have taken the step to release those shackles from you, how you react after that, the choices that you make after that, indicate what you think about that forgiveness. It indicates what you think about the guy that took your place. Just like Barabbas. And we could go here to the dog that returns to his vomit and the pig that returns to the mud, and we could go to all those verses. And obviously, they are pretty descriptive in their own way. But here's the one that kind of jabs me in the gut. Hebrews chapter 10. If we deliberately keep on sinning after receiving the knowledge of the truth, no further sacrifice is left for us. Someone who rejected the law of Moses was put to death without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much greater punishment do you think that person deserves who has contempt for the Son of God, profanes the blood of the covenant that made him holy, and insults the Spirit of grace? How the Hebrew writer describes someone who makes the choice after learning about the knowledge of the truth to return to their old life. They make the choice of Barabbas having those chains dropped off of him and then going and dying in a further future revolt. That viscerally disgusts us, right? The fact that Barabbas, like Jesus, physically took his place and then he goes back to the life he lives, that just eats at us, right? Like that, like our hair, back of our neck stands up. That makes us angry. Like, how could you disrespect what that did and go back to that life? And the Hebrew writer says, we're all Barabbas, man. Like, that choice that we make indicates what we think about that sacrifice every day. And to think that we are Barabbas and going back to the revolt, that we profane the blood of the covenant that made us holy. The blood of the covenant that made us holy. I love how this translation puts that. That blood, that Jesus blood that made us holy, we just think it's common, profane. Profane means to take something holy and make it common. We just think that's common. Like, that's just another thing that happened to me. And I can go do what I want to do. So we can't answer the question for Barabbas. We don't know what the answer is. But we have to answer it for ourselves. Christians, this morning, we answer this every day. If our lives are changed, it indicates to the world what we think about the blood of the covenant that made us holy. And if we choose to, like a sheep, go our own way, if we choose to selfishly decide that my decisions are going to be based on my needs and not God's needs, what does God want me to be versus what I want me to be? If we make that choice, we indicate what we think about the blood of the covenant. Man, that is heavy. I pray that we can all think about that a little bit and take that with us. So what's our response to grace? Because I hope that this kind of resonates with you the way it resonated with me. And when I sing those songs in the future, and when I think about that visual of Jesus being on the cross, that I'm going to have that reaction. Man, that's my beating. You know, just like Barnabas, I told you, just like Barabbas, standing out there in the sunlight, like, that's my beating. My cross. That guy taking my place. How is that? Like, that guy is taking my place. So it's not justice. Justice is getting what we deserve. But it is mercy. Mercy's not getting what we do deserve. It is grace. Grace is getting what we don't deserve. Last verse, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. Paul takes the last 40 minutes of my rambling and puts it into one verse because he is better than I. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. For our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. That we should walk away today in stunned disbelief that somebody's taken our place. Like if we don't recognize that, if we don't, as Christians, if we don't walk out of here every service just like in stunned disbelief that somebody took our place, I don't think we appreciate the story of Barabbas. Have that removed. That's my beating. It's my cross. That guy's taking my place. This morning, you understand that is your beating and that is your cross and that guy's taking your place. Man, we want to love on you. We'd love for you to come forward. As together we stand and as we sing.